Sergei Kichagin, editor-in-chief of 2000, is criticizing the US for using the theme of human rights to put pressure on Ukrainian President Leonid Kuchma in response to his steps for closer cooperation with Russia. Kichagin believes that by giving political asylum to Nicholas Melnychenko, the US administration stirs political conflict in Ukraine in order to remove or weaken Kuchma. Without Ukrainian missile factories, Russia will lose the arms race initiated by the White House, reasons Kichagin.
Кучма, в общем-то, проявил себя довольно таким крепким политиком, быстро заручился поддержкой.
Kuchma proved to be a resilient politician. He enlisted the support of Moscow, received this support, and remained in power. He made concessions with America, which at that time was preoccupied with the Iraq campaign. Kuchma actually supported America on the Iraq mission, and that prolonged his stay in power until 2004. But if he thought, and I think he did, that the Americans were satisfied with his stance on the Iraq issue and would leave him alone, he, of course, was mistaken.
По иракскому вопросу оставят его в покое, он, конечно, ошибался.
Кучма не был однозначно пророссийский правитель. Кучма пытался соблюсти баланс.
Peter Tolochko, historian, academic at NAS of Ukraine. Kuchma was not explicitly a pro-Russia politician. Kuchma tries to strike a balance between the West and Russia, and I still believe that this is how it should be. There is no other way. But for America and the West, this was not quite right, and it did not work for them. They wanted a leader of Ukraine who would be completely devoted to Western European and American values. That was necessary in order to integrate Ukraine into the NATO alliance, and let's be honest, to use it as a battering ram against Russia. Ukraine has been receiving hundreds of millions of dollars in foreign aid from the United States. The US government has sent some $4 million to Ukraine for monitoring and assistance programs, including training electoral commission members and domestic monitoring organizations. Other aspects of this bill are likewise troubling. This bill seeks from thousands of miles away and without any of the facts to demand that the Ukrainian government solve crimes within Ukraine and have absolutely nothing to do with the United States. No one knows what happened to journalist Georgiy Gongadze. This meddling into the Ukrainian judicial system is inappropriate and counterproductive. Ron Paul, Congressman, March 21st, 2002. A variety of U.S. advisors and consultants have always been working in the presidential administration, and especially in the cabinet of ministers during the Kravchuk and Kuchma presidencies. They were under the umbrella of the International Monetary Fund, under the umbrella of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development or humanitarian funds. All this created a system of constant control of the authorities and officials. Naturally, information traveled through various channels for analysis and consideration, and had very serious consequences for domestic and foreign policy in Ukraine. Tapegate, the saga of the bug. 2 months after the disappearance of Georgiy Gongadze, the tape scandal exploded. Hundreds of hours of audio recordings became heavy artillery aimed at the presidency. The Gongadze case became the first strike. The Kalchuga case, flying missiles, and other cases awaited their turn. Without any supporting evidence, the Melnychenko tapes became a powerful weapon of blackmail. Scandalous statements by a major of the presidential guards who announced this taping of Kuchma's conversations later played the role of a Trojan horse that propelled into the power of the Orange elite.
Что уже очевидно и тогда было, и сейчас, что все это было действительно срежиссировано.
Vadim Petrosuk, 2000, columnist, Ukraine. It was apparent then and now that all this was orchestrated. These tapes were approved, formatted, and then pitched to the public and media. Batches of prepared tapes were given to mass media. Was Melnychenko a traitor? Then the question arises, was he a friend? Was he one of us? Maybe he wasn't one of us.
Соответственно, вопрос, а был ли он другом, был ли он своим, а может он и не был своим?
Melnychenko не был, конечно, предателем. Это очень важная тема, потому что...
Melnychenko was not, of course, a traitor. This is a crucial point, Because if we say that he was and is a traitor, then we agree with the version of the orchestrators of the scandal that this was an unlucky young man tormented by remorse for his country and financial problems, who decided to tape Kuchma's conversation and pass him to the West. In fact, it has been repeatedly proven that it was technically impossible to make recordings in the office with a regular tape recorder. The next individual for the role of fighter against the regime was not chosen by chance. Organizers of the coup, a powerful financial intelligence group which had perpetual access to presidential circles, needed a character to divert attention. The image of a humble, ordinary employee of the presidential guards who needed money for medical treatment for his daughter was easy to relate to and to understand by trusting Ukrainian people brought up on soap operas, just as was the image of Georgiy Gongadze. An important component of the covert operation was Major Melnichenko's escape to the West. It allowed for the publication and distribution of any fictional evidence from decoded tapes, making the fugitive a leading voice essential for each stage of the propaganda.
Кольчуге к Кучме не имеет никакого отношения, это было ясно.
It was clear that Kuchma had nothing to do with Kolchuga, but the fact is that he was now trying to have Ukraine accepted into influential international institutions, to be represented even in those organizations where it was not welcome, and in fact he was doing it at the cost of his own health.
Если бы он даже и поставил эти кольчуги в Ирак,
Even if he did supply arms to Iraq, they were defensive arms, not an atomic bomb or a missile. This was a shield which protected a country's peaceful skies. What's wrong with that? But the Americans were to invade Iraq, and they needed this monstrous provocation. They combed the sand. Where is Kolchuga? There is no Kolchuga.
и вот делалась эта чудовищная провокация. Перелопатили весь песок. Где кольчуга? Нет кольчуги.
The first thing that makes the authenticity of these tapes questionable is the fact that on one of these tapes, Leonid Kuchma speaks in Ukrainian, while in reality, within his close circle, he always speaks in Russian. Second, none of the tapes contain conversations between the president and Viktor Yushchenko or Yulia Tymoshenko. The reputations of the future leaders of the Maidan had to be impassable. In an attempt to prove the authenticity of the Melnichenko tapes, representatives of the Special Commission of the Verkhovna Rada announced that they had received the results of the authentication tests carried out by the Americans. Bruce Koenig, an expert from the company Begtech, came to the conclusion that the tapes were original.
Мы обратились к известнейшему во всем мире авторитету.
We approached a reputable, world-renowned British scientist, Peter French, who is a phonetician, president of the World Association of Forensic Acoustics, and editor of an industry magazine. And in fact, as a specialist, as an expert, he confirmed our hypothesis that it was impossible to reach the conclusions that were made by the US experts from Begtech. Such tapes are easily recorded, manipulated, edited, re-recorded, and you can simply mislead experts.
Монтируются, 5 раз перезаписываются и вводят в заблуждение экспертов.
I would say to anyone who is interested in the Melnichenko tapes that it is impossible to prove their authenticity. Modern computer technology allows you to hide all traces of falsification, preventing experts from discovering them. And it can be used successfully by ill-intending individuals. Peter French.
Вот смотрите, недавно к нам привезли майора Мельниченко. Вот так вот привезли.
Recently, Melnichenko was brought to Ukraine. He gave a press conference, then he was again taken out of the country. Investigative journalists have already been able to prove that he is linked to the Gongadze case, and that he is not innocent. Yet though he came here to be accused of being a criminal, he was free to leave. This means that it was all just part of the game. He came to Ukraine with guarantees that he will be able to leave the country. The game is not finished yet. It continues.
Если бы не было ему гарантии, что он уедет обратно. То есть игра не окончена, она продолжается.
In this building, on the street with the beautiful name Orangery now, lie the remains of the so-called Taranchurescu body, or the body of Gongadze. The story of the gruesome findings, with all of its ups and downs, continues in its 7th year and can compete with the most sophisticated Hollywood thrillers.